The avoidant encountered you expecting to engage familiar dynamic they successfully maintained with previous partners, expecting to establish comfortable defended position where they controlled engagement level through their withdrawal, where they received relationship benefits without providing adequate reciprocation, where they maintained autonomy while accessing your consistent presence, where they determined relationship progression through their resistance while you accommodated their limitations. They expected you would pursue when they withdrew, providing them with validation, and maintained connection without requiring their vulnerable engagement. They expected you would tolerate their patterns while hoping for improvement, allowing them to maintain defended comfortable position without facing consequences that would necessitate change. They expected you would sacrifice your needs, adjusting expectations downward to match their limited capacity, ensuring relationship continued despite their inadequacy. Yet you demonstrated specific qualities and established specific boundaries that prevented them from maintaining their usual defended comfortable dynamic, demonstrated through your responses to their patterns, through standards you maintained despite their resistance, through self-protection you implemented when their behavior fell below acceptable levels, through strength that appeared as patience yet proved to be choice rather than weakness when you eventually established definitive consequences. They recognized relatively early that you were different from previous partners who allowed them complete control. Recognized you possessed clarity about your worth that would not allow indefinite tolerance of inadequate treatment, possessed boundaries that would eventually impose costs on their patterns, even while you demonstrated initial patience, possessed capacity to leave. That meant their usual strategy of minimal effort would not sustain relationship indefinitely as minimal effort sustained previous relationships. This recognition that they could not have their way with you created specific crisis in their defended psychology, created anxiety that they might lose valuable relationship if they continued usual patterns, created tension between their defended resistance to change and their desire to maintain access to exceptional partner, created internal conflict between their defended comfortable patterns and their recognition. Those patterns would eventually cost them relationship with you. The recognition manifested through their behavior, showing they knew you were different. Manifested through moments where they provided slightly more effort than usual, suggesting they recognized you required more than their baseline minimal provision, through expressions of anxiety about losing you indicating they understood you would not tolerate their patterns indefinitely, through occasional defensive anger when you established boundaries revealing their frustration, that usual manipulation tactics proved ineffective with you. Yet recognizing they could not have their way with you proved insufficient to generate genuine change, because recognition alone does not restructure defensive patterns, requiring therapeutic work to address. Proved insufficient because their defended psychology prioritized protecting defensive structure over doing vulnerable work that sustaining relationship with you would have required. Proved insufficient because short-term defended comfort exceeded their capacity to sacrifice comfort for long-term relationship benefit with exceptional partner. They chose their patterns over choosing you, chose maintaining defended control, even knowing control would eventually cost them relationship, chose defended autonomy, even recognizing autonomy came at price of losing valuable partnership, chose familiar, comfortable, defended position. Even understanding comfortable position proved incompatible with sustaining relationship with person who would not allow them to have their way through indefinite tolerance of inadequate treatment. That exceptional qualities and established boundaries prevented you from providing regardless of how much they wanted you to accommodate their defended limitations. You had self-awareness they couldn't manipulate. You saw the patterns before they fully formed. The avoidant relies on specific manipulation tactics that operate most effectively with partners who lack awareness of avoidant patterns, relies on partners interpreting withdrawal as busy schedule rather than recognizing defended deactivation, on partners accepting inconsistency as circumstantial rather than identifying strategic pattern, on partners believing defended explanations rather than perceiving defended function behind behaviors. Previous partners may have tolerated patterns for extended periods because they did not recognize patterns as patterns, did not understand withdrawal served defensive function rather than reflecting legitimate external demands, did not identify inconsistency as attachment-related deactivation rather than accepting presented explanations about stress or overwhelm, did not perceive the strategic element in how patterns maintained avoidance defended comfortable position while preventing relationship from progressing toward deeper intimacy. Yet you possess psychological awareness that prevented their usual manipulation from operating effectively, possessed understanding of avoidant attachment patterns that allowed you to recognize their behaviors as defendedly strategic, rather than as circumstantial or personality-based, possessed capacity to identify patterns emerging, rather than requiring extended time to recognize problematic dynamics, possessed framework for understanding that withdrawal and inconsistency serve defensive function, protecting against intimacy, rather than reflecting their claims about external circumstances or natural personality. Your awareness manifested through your responses that indicated perception, manifested through comments that named their patterns accurately, through questions that revealed you understood defended function behind behaviors, through boundaries that specifically addressed attachment-related dynamics rather than accepting surface explanations. The avoidant recognized your awareness through specific interactions that revealed you could not be easily manipulated. When they withdrew claiming stress or overwhelm, you demonstrated understanding this was defended response to intimacy rather than accepting external stress explanation, demonstrated through statements acknowledging their pattern rather than through pursuing them anxiously as less aware partners would pursue. When they provided inconsistent availability, you identified this as deactivation pattern rather than accepting their explanations about busy schedule, identified through naming the pattern or through establishing boundaries around inconsistency rather than accommodating indefinitely. When they created distance after periods of closeness, you recognize this as defended regulation of intimacy rather than believing their justifications, recognized through your lack of self-blame and through your maintenance of your worth rather than questioning whether you caused their withdrawal. Your pattern recognition particularly prevented them from using confusion as manipulation tool. Avoidants often rely on keeping partners confused about relationship status, about avoidance feelings, about what behaviors mean, rely on confusion, keeping partners stuck, analyzing and hoping, rather than recognizing patterns and protecting themselves. Confused partners remain focused on trying to understand avoidance behavior, trying to determine what they did wrong, trying to figure out how to make relationship work, remain in position of pursuing and accommodating, while avoidant maintains control through keeping partner uncertain and off balance. Your awareness eliminated confusion that manipulation depends upon, eliminated through your accurate understanding of what patterns meant, through your recognition of defended function, through your refusal to remain in confused pursuing position that pattern recognition allowed you to exit. The awareness also manifested through your refusal to accept their reframing of your legitimate concerns. When you expressed hurt about their withdrawal, they attempted to reframe your hurt as your excessive neediness, attempted to make you question whether your needs were reasonable, rather than accepting their withdrawal was inadequate behavior. When you established boundaries around their inconsistency, they attempted to reframe boundaries as your controlling behavior, attempted to position your self-protection as problematic, rather than acknowledging their patterns necessitated your boundaries. When you named their patterns, they attempted to reframe your accurate observations as your overthinking or your bringing relationship baggage, attempted to invalidate your perception rather than facing that perception accurately identified their defended strategies. Yet your awareness prevented these reframing attempts from succeeding in making you doubt your perception or your worth. You maintained clarity that your needs were legitimate rather than accepting their characterization of needs as excessive. You maintained understanding that your boundaries were appropriate self-protection rather than accepting their positioning of boundaries as controlling. You maintained confidence in your accurate pattern recognition rather than doubting your perception when they attempted to invalidate observations. The maintained clarity prevented them from using gaslighting and reframing tactics that work with less aware partners who can be made to doubt their perception and their worth when avoidant refuses to acknowledge patterns and instead attacks partner's character or mental health. Understanding that your self-awareness prevented manipulation allows recognition that they identified you as threat to their usual defended comfortable dynamic early in relationship. Your awareness meant they could not maintain you in confused pursuing position that usually allows them control. Your pattern recognition meant they could not use standard manipulation tactics without you identifying and naming what they were doing. Your maintained clarity about your worth and your needs meant they could not make you doubt yourself in ways that would allow them to continue patterns without facing your boundaries and your accurate observations. They knew they could not have their way with you, knew they could not manipulate you into indefinite tolerance, could not keep you confused and pursuing, could not make you doubt your legitimate needs and your accurate perception of their defended inadequacy. You matched their unavailability instead of chasing. This destroyed their sense of power. The avoidant maintains power and control in relationships through their defended unavailability that triggers partners' pursuit, maintains through withdrawal that generates partners' anxiety and pursuing behaviors, through inconsistency that keeps partner uncertain and working to secure relationship, through emotional distance that creates partners' efforts to achieve closeness and connection. The power dynamic depends on asymmetry, where avoidant controls engagement through their unavailability, while partner pursues attempting to restore connection. Depends on avoidant being person who determines when contact occurs, who decides what level of intimacy is tolerated, who controls relationship progression through their resistance that partner works to overcome through increasing pursuit and accommodation. Previous partners likely responded to avoidance unavailability with predictable pursuit that maintained power dynamic, responded to withdrawal by reaching out anxiously trying to restore connection, responded to inconsistency by working harder to secure relationship and to prove their value, responded to emotional distance by increasing their own emotional expression and vulnerability, hoping to generate reciprocal openness. This pursuing response to unavailability served avoidance defended needs perfectly, served by validating their worth through partners' continued pursuit, despite inadequate reciprocation, served by maintaining their control through partners' behavior remaining predictable and manageable, served by allowing them to regulate intimacy through their unavailability. Knowing partner would continue investing regardless of how unavailable they remained. Yet you responded to their unavailability with matching unavailability rather than with pursuit. Responded to withdrawal by creating your own distance rather than by anxiously seeking to restore connection. Responded to inconsistency by becoming less available rather than by working harder to secure relationship. Responded to emotional distance by maintaining your own emotional boundaries rather than by increasing vulnerable expression, hoping to trigger their reciprocation. Your matched unavailability disrupted their expected dynamic completely. Disrupted by eliminating the pursuit their unavailability was designed to generate. Disrupted by making your behavior unpredictable rather than reliably pursuing. Disrupted by demonstrating you would not continue investing when they demonstrated through unavailability that investment was not adequately valued or reciprocated. The matched unavailability destroyed their sense of power by eliminating their control over dynamic. When they withdrew expecting you to pursue, your non-pursuit meant withdrawal achieved nothing they intended, meant they lost access to you rather than creating distance while maintaining your pursuing presence, meant they could not regulate engagement through withdrawal, because withdrawal created mutual distance, rather than creating the asymmetric distance where they controlled while you pursued. When they demonstrated inconsistency, expecting you to work harder to secure relationship, your reduced availability meant inconsistency cost them your presence rather than generating your increased effort, meant they faced consequences of inconsistency rather than receiving reward of your pursuit and accommodation. The power destruction particularly manifested through them losing ability to predict and control your responses. Throughout relationship with previous partners, they could predict that withdrawal generated pursuit, allowing them to manage intimacy through creating distance knowing partner would close that distance. They could predict that inconsistency generated partners' increased effort, allowing them to receive maximum while providing minimum. They could predict that emotional distance generated partners' vulnerable expression, allowing them to access emotions vicariously without having to reciprocate vulnerability. Your matching unavailability eliminated all predictability, eliminated their confidence that withdrawal would generate your pursuit, that inconsistency would generate your increased effort, that distance would generate your vulnerable approach rather than your protected withdrawal matching their distance. The destroyed power also removed their exit strategy that unavailability usually provided. Avoidants use unavailability as escape hatch, Use withdrawal to exit when intimacy exceeds tolerance. Knowing partner's pursuit will maintain relationship, allowing them to return when comfortable. Use inconsistency to maintain flexibility. Knowing partner's accommodation ensures relationship continues despite their unreliability. Your matching unavailability eliminated exit strategy by making unavailability actually create distance, rather than creating the manageable contained distance where partner's pursuit prevented genuine separation. When they withdrew, you allowed withdrawal to create actual separation rather than pursuing to maintain connection. When they were inconsistent, you responded with boundaries that created real consequences, rather than with accommodation that made inconsistency cost-free. Understanding that you matched unavailability rather than chasing allows recognition that this response specifically prevented them from having their way with you. Their way depended on your pursuit maintaining connection despite their unavailability, depended on a symmetric dynamic where they controlled through withdrawal while you pursued. Your matched unavailability created symmetric dynamic where unavailability generated mutual distance, created situation where they lost power to control engagement, lost ability to maintain you pursuing while they withdrew, lost exit strategy that usually allowed them to regulate intimacy through unavailability without facing real relationship costs. They recognized you would not chase, recognized through experiencing that withdrawal did not generate your pursuit, that unavailability did not trigger your anxiety-driven effort to restore connection, that they could not maintain defended, comfortable position if you refused to participate in asymmetric dynamic. Their power depended upon creating through their unavailability meeting your reliable pursuit. You required reciprocity instead of accepting crumbs. They'd never encountered that boundary before. The avoidant maintains defended, comfortable position through providing minimal effort while receiving maximum benefit from partners who accept crumbs, maintains through providing occasional attention that partners interpret as meaningful investment, through sporadic emotional availability that partners appreciate as breakthrough moments, through inconsistent presence that partners accommodate while hoping consistency will eventually develop. Previous partners likely accepted crumbs as sufficient, accepted because crumbs felt like progress compared to complete withdrawal, accepted because scarcity made minimal effort feel valuable, accepted because hope for future improvement allowed tolerating present inadequacy, accepted because confusion about whether expectations were reasonable made them doubt whether they deserved more than crumbs avoidant provided. The crumb acceptance served avoidance defended needs by allowing them to maintain relationship without adequate reciprocation, allowed them to receive partners' consistent presence and emotional support while providing only minimal sporadic engagement, allowed them to access relationship benefits without vulnerable investment that reciprocal partnership would require, allowed them to keep partner invested through providing just enough to maintain hope without providing enough to actually meet partners' legitimate needs for consistency and emotional availability. The dynamic created asymmetric relationship where partner provided maximum, provided consistent presence, emotional availability, patience, accommodation, effort to maintain connection, while avoidant provided minimum, provided occasional contact, sporadic emotional expression, inconsistent availability, minimal effort that felt significant only because scarcity made any effort appear valuable. Yet you required genuine reciprocity rather than accepting crumbs as sufficient, required through establishing clear standards about what acceptable partnership included, required through boundaries that imposed consequences when behavior fell below standards, required through willingness to protect yourself when reciprocity was not provided, rather than continuing to accept inadequate treatment while hoping improvement would eventually occur. Your requirement for reciprocity manifested through specific responses to their crumb offerings that demonstrated crumbs were insufficient. When they provided occasional attention after extended withdrawal, you did not respond with gratitude suggesting attention was adequate. You responded with boundaries indicating that occasional attention after withdrawal was not acceptable pattern. When they offered sporadic emotional availability, you did not treat this as breakthrough moment. You identified this as their minimum that fell far below consistent emotional engagement actual partnership required. The reciprocity requirement particularly manifested through you maintaining your standards, even when maintaining standards meant relationship might end. Previous partners may have lowered standards to maintain relationship, lowered by accepting that avoidant could not provide consistency, so inconsistency should be tolerated, lowered by believing avoidance defended limitations meant their minimal effort was maximum. They could provide deserving acceptance, lowered by convincing themselves that crumbs were sufficient because expecting more was unrealistic given avoidance attachment patterns. Yet you maintained that genuine partnership required reciprocal effort, regardless of avoidance defended limitations, maintained that you deserved partner who provided consistent presence, emotional availability, reliable follow-through, rather than accepting that avoidance limitations meant you should accept treatment falling below relationship standards. The maintained standards created specific crises for avoidant because standards meant they would lose relationship if they continued providing only crumbs. Previous relationships continued despite their minimal effort because partners accepted crumbs, continued because acceptance meant avoidant faced no consequences, requiring them to choose between increasing effort or losing relationship. Your standards imposed this choice, imposed by making clear that crumbs were insufficient, that relationship continuation required genuine reciprocity, that you would protect yourself through leaving if reciprocity was not provided. The imposed choice threatened their defended comfortable position because position depended on partners accepting crumbs, allowing them to maintain relationship without adequate effort. The reciprocity requirement also prevented them from using intermittent reinforcement as manipulation tactic. Avoidants often use intermittent reinforcement, providing occasional good treatment among predominant inadequate treatment to keep partners hooked, hoping for more good moments while tolerating predominant inadequacy. The occasional good moments feel significant because scarcity makes any positive attention feel valuable. Create hope that good moments indicate potential for relationship to become consistently good. Keep partners pursuing and accommodating, hoping to generate more good moments through their continued effort and patience. Your requirement for reciprocity prevented intermittent reinforcement from working by maintaining standard that occasional good moments were insufficient, by identifying that predominant pattern was inadequate regardless of occasional exceptions, by refusing to organize relationship around hoping occasional good moments would become consistent pattern. Understanding that you required reciprocity allows recognition that this boundary was unfamiliar threat to their usual dynamic. They had never encountered partner who maintained standards requiring genuine reciprocal effort, had encountered partners who accepted crumbs, who lowered standards to maintain relationship, who tolerated predominant inadequacy, hoping occasional good moments indicated potential. Your requirement that they provide genuine reciprocity or lose relationship created choice they had not previously faced, created pressure to either increase effort to reciprocal level or face losing valuable partner to standards they could not manipulate you into lowering. They knew they could not have their way with you, knew they could not maintain you accepting crumbs, could not convince you to lower standards, could not use intermittent reinforcement to keep you hooked while providing predominantly inadequate treatment. That genuine reciprocity requirement identified as unacceptable regardless of occasional better moments. You didn't need them to feel complete. That self-sufficiency was incomprehensible to their ego. The avoidant maintains inflated ego and sense of importance through relationships with partners who demonstrate need for them, through partners whose pursuit suggests avoidant is valuable enough to chase, whose tolerance of patterns suggests avoidant is important enough that inadequate treatment should be accepted to maintain access, whose emotional dependence on relationship suggests avoidant provides essential value that partner cannot find elsewhere or cannot generate independently. Previous partners likely demonstrated this need in ways that validated avoidant's ego, demonstrated through anxious pursuit when avoidant withdrew, suggesting they needed avoidant's presence, demonstrated through continued investment despite inadequate reciprocation, suggesting relationship with avoidant was so valuable that inadequacy should be tolerated, demonstrated through organizing life around relationship, suggesting avoidant was central to their well-being and their happiness. The demonstrated need served avoidant's defended ego by confirming they were more valuable partner in dynamic, confirmed through partner needing them more than they needed partner, through partner pursuing while they withdrew, through partner sacrificing and accommodating while they maintained defended comfortable position providing minimum. The confirmation protected ego from facing their inadequacy by positioning inadequacy as tolerable because they were valuable enough that partner would accept inadequate treatment to maintain relationship. The ego protection allowed them to maintain defended belief they were good enough partner despite patterns. Allowed through interpreting partner's continued presence despite inadequacy as proof inadequacy was acceptable, rather than recognizing partner's continued presence reflected partner's excessive tolerance rather than reflecting their adequate partnership. Yet you demonstrated self-sufficiency that contradicted their ego-protecting narrative about being needed. Demonstrated through maintaining full independent life that did not require relationship for completeness, through emotional stability that did not depend on their presence for regulation, through clear sense of worth that did not need their validation for maintenance, through capacity for happiness that existed independently of relationship status or their treatment. Your self-sufficiency manifested through specific behaviors that revealed you did not need them. When they withdrew, you engaged with your independent life rather than demonstrating distress requiring their return to restore your stability. When they were unavailable, you pursued your own goals and interests rather than organizing time around hoping for their contact. When relationship was struggling, you maintained your well-being rather than demonstrating that relationship struggles devastated you, requiring relationship repair to restore your functioning. The self-sufficiency particularly threatened their ego because it meant you could leave. Could leave because you did not need relationship for your completeness. Could leave because your well-being did not depend on maintaining connection with them. Could leave because your independent life provided sufficient satisfaction that relationship was enhancement rather than necessity. Previous partners who needed them could not easily leave because leaving meant losing essential source of worth, happiness, or stability that relationship provided. Yet your self-sufficiency meant leaving was a viable option, meant you could choose to protect yourself through leaving without devastating consequences to your well-being, meant you could prioritize your standards and your needs over maintaining relationship, because relationship was not essential to your functioning or your happiness. The incomprehensibility of your self-sufficiency to their ego stemmed from self-sufficiency contradicting their defended assumptions about relationship dynamics. Their ego depended on believing they were more valuable partner whose patterns should be tolerated because they provided something essential that partner needed. Your self-sufficiency proved you did not need what they provided, proved relationship was choice rather than necessity, proved you valued yourself enough that you did not need their validation, proved you could generate happiness and stability independently rather than requiring relationship to provide these. The proof threatened ego by forcing recognition they were not as important as ego needed believing, forced facing they were not essential to your well-being, were not irreplaceable source of value, were not person whose patterns should be tolerated because losing them would devastate you. The threatened ego manifested through their defensive responses to your self-sufficiency, manifested through attempts to criticize your independence as coldness or emotional unavailability, suggesting your self-sufficiency was problematic, manifested through efforts to create situations where you would need them, validating ego through demonstrating they provided value you depended upon, manifested through increased pursuit when your self-sufficiency made clear you could leave attempting to restore dynamic where they felt needed and important. The defensive responses revealed they recognized your self-sufficiency as threat, recognized that self-sufficient partner who did not need them was partner who could establish and maintain boundaries, who could leave when patterns proved intolerable, who could not be manipulated through fears of being alone or through dependence on relationship for well-being. Understanding that your self-sufficiency was incomprehensible to their ego allows recognition that this quality prevented them from having their way with you. Their way depended on you needing them, depended on need keeping you tolerating inadequacy, depended on need preventing you from leaving, depended on need allowing them to maintain ego-protecting belief they were valuable enough that patterns should be accepted. Your self-sufficiency eliminated this need-based tolerance, eliminated by proving you did not need relationship for completeness, by demonstrating you valued yourself independently of their validation, by showing you could leave protecting yourself rather than remaining in inadequate dynamic because dependency prevented departure. They knew they could not have their way with self-sufficient you, knew they could not use your need to keep you tolerating, could not depend on dependency preventing boundaries, could not maintain ego-protecting belief that you needed them when self-sufficiency made clear you chose relationship rather than needed relationship and could unchoose when their patterns made choice no longer serve your well-being.